Welcome back to Chapter 8. This is our last lecture for Bio 101, and the title of this chapter is The Green World's Gift, Photosynthesis. In this chapter, we'll look at photosynthesis and energy, the components of photosynthesis. We'll look at the two stages of photosynthesis, which are the light reactions and the Calvin cycle, and then talk about some different types of photosynthesis that can occur, including photorespiration in the C4 pathway and CAM photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process where plants take sunlight energy and turn it into sugar, which they can use for energy to live and grow. And the term photo in photosynthesis means light, and the term synthesis means to put things together to make something new. So photosynthesis simply means putting things together to make something new using light energy. So what are the things that plants need to put together to do this? They take carbon dioxide from the air, water from the ground, and energy from sunlight. So take these things, sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, goes through this reaction where those elements recombine, and out of that reaction comes glucose, a type of sugar, and oxygen. Photosynthesis has made life possible as we know it on Earth because the sugar that's produced in photosynthesis is the source of food for almost all living things on Earth. And photosynthesis is also responsible for the atmospheric oxygen used by many living things in cellular respiration. So if you remember, as we talked about respiration in the last chapter, oxygen is an essential component. That's why we constantly need to breathe oxygen. And that oxygen on Earth comes from plants, from doing photosynthesis. So that's a byproduct of photosynthesis. The sugar that plants produce in photosynthesis is used by those plants to grow and live, and it's also eaten by everything else up the food chain from plants. When they consume that sugar, they get energy from plants as well. So you probably think of photosynthesis as something plants do if you've thought about it at all before, but there are actually three types of living organisms that use photosynthesis, and these are plants, algae, and certain types of bacteria, such as cyanobacteria. Photosynthesis, if you look at what goes in and what comes out and what's happening, it's the exact opposite of respiration. So in photosynthesis, you are taking carbon dioxide and water with energy from the sun and creating glucose and oxygen. In respiration, you are taking glucose and oxygen and creating water and carbon dioxide as off products. So going this way in the reaction is photosynthesis. Going this way in the reaction is cellular respiration. And this picture from your text is showing the same thing, that taking that sugar and oxygen and breaking that down to get energy is called cellular respiration. And it breaks it down into water and carbon dioxide, and taking water and carbon dioxide with sunlight energy and recombining that into sugar and oxygen is photosynthesis. If you remember, photosynthesis needs three things going into it. It needs light, carbon dioxide, and water. And the reason that light is needed is light energy travels into the center of the leaf, so into this area in here, which is called the mesophyll, and it reaches these green things called chloroplasts. And that green pigment in there is what absorbs the sunlight energy. And so it's essentially light energy is used in photosynthesis for energy to fuel that reaction. Carbon dioxide is needed, and it enters the leaf through these openings in the leaf, little pores or openings called stomata. And the carbon dioxide will also go in through these stomata to the chloroplasts in the center of the leaf. And then water is needed by photosynthesis, and that usually gets absorbed by the plants through the roots, and it also will travel to the chloroplast. So everything that the plant needs to do photosynthesis travels somehow through the plant and into these things called chloroplasts, which is this right here. And that's just an organelle that's located within the plant cell. So we know that we have water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight energy coming into these chloroplasts. Let's look at what happens once they reach the chloroplasts. So there's two primary stages to photosynthesis. Stage 1, which is the light reactions, and stage 2, which are sometimes known as the dark reactions or the Calvin cycle. And water and light energy are what go into the light reactions, and carbon dioxide is what's going to go into our dark reaction or our Calvin cycle. So the first thing that happens in photosynthesis is water comes into the chloroplast. It gets hit by that sunlight energy, which breaks apart the water and gives off electrons and ATP energy, and in the form of these hydrogens. So these hydrogens carry electrons and ATP energy. And then the oxygens are left over, and so that's what the plant sort of breathes out, is oxygen. Now the next phase of photosynthesis is the Calvin cycle. And this is the second stage where these electrons and energy from the light reactions are used to convert carbon dioxide into and rearrange it and form a sugar molecule, as well as so this process of this cycle here is run by the ATP and electron energy that's created in the light reactions. And we'll go over each of these two phases in a little bit more detail on the next few slides. So first is stage one, the light reactions. And if you remember from the last chapter, electrons are what carry the energy that's needed to make ATP. That's that usable form of energy. Electrons get carried in something called NADH or NADPH in this case. And if you remember, that NADH or NADPH is sort of like a taxi cab. And when it's filled, that means it has electrons in it and it's carrying energy. And so the first thing that happens is the sunlight hits what they call these photosystems. First it hits photosystem 2, which seems a little bit backwards, but it hits photosystem 2. Light energy comes down and hits this. It breaks apart water and gives off an electron. Now that electron moves through photosystem 1, and then that energy from that electron from as it goes through photosystem 1 is combined with this NADP to make NADPH, which is your electron carrier. So essentially, the main thing to remember here in the light reactions is that sunlight energy breaks apart water, which gives off an electron, and that electron is carried then to the next reaction. So let's look at why the light reactions are so important. First of all, sunlight energy, is used to split water and give off that electron, which is the form of energy for the rest of the reactions. And also oxygen is given off, and that oxygen is essential for all other life on Earth that needs to breathe oxygen. And this is a picture from your text just showing the light reactions. And again, that electron is moving from photosystem 2 to photosystem 1. These are just places where these reactions are occurring. And then that electron is carried out in that NADPH electron taxicab and carried on to our next phase, which is the Calvin cycle. And this is all taking place in the chloroplast. So our next stage of photosynthesis, stage 2, is the Calvin cycle, which are sometimes known as the dark reactions. They used to always be called the dark reactions, but these reactions do not have to occur in the dark. They just don't need light to occur. So they started calling it the Calvin cycle more commonly. But you may hear those terms and they both refer to the same thing. So the Calvin cycle is the second stage of photosynthesis, and the reaction can take place at night because it uses the energy from stage 1 and doesn't directly need sunlight. So in the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere comes into this cycle, goes through a lot of different steps using ATP and NADPH energy from the first two stages of photosynthesis and combines that carbon from carbon dioxide into sugar. So if you remember, sugar is a compound made of 5 carbons in sort of a ring, and so those carbons from the atmosphere get rearranged into this ring shape, and sugar is the byproduct. So the result of the Calvin cycle is this high energy sugar called G3P, and it is the product of photosynthesis. We'll go over the steps of the Calvin cycle just a little bit more detail on the next slide. Your book does go into it in quite a bit more detail. As long as you're familiar with the main overview of what we go over in lecture, you'll be fine as far as the test. So the steps that I would like you to know is that carbon dioxide goes in, and so we have these 3 carbon dioxide molecules. they combine with these 3 RUBP molecules, which are 5 carbon molecules. These are molecules that will just continuously, they start out in the Calvin cycle, things get rearranged, and they end up again as the end product of the carbon cycle. So they sort of keep going, cycling through the cycle over and over again. And so what happens is this carbon dioxide comes in, combines with this RUBP, these 3 molecules, and we get off out of that 6 of these 3 carbon molecules, and the yellow in this picture is carbon. We use some of that energy from ATP from our stage 1 reactions and some of that NADPH, that electron energy, that gets combined, that rearranges these molecules to make 6 different 3 carbon molecules, which are called G3P, and that's the sugar that's given off. Now, the rest of these, so one of these 3 carbon molecules is given off from this reaction, and the remaining 5 molecules continue through the cycle. They get rearranged using some more ATP from the light reactions, and they end up with these 3 RUBP molecules, which are what we started the cycle with. Now, this cycle has to go through actually 6 times to make a molecule of the actual glucose sugar that comes out of a plant and is used by that plant and then eaten as by other organisms for energy. But this is the main process here in the Calvin cycle. Essentially, the main thing to keep in mind is that you're taking in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, you're rearranging it, and you're coming out with sugar, and that's what's occurring during the Calvin cycle. We've covered so far the types of photosynthesis that most plants do, which are known as C3 photosynthesis. So in most plants, the stomata, which are those openings in the leaf, will stay open long enough to let in carbon dioxide and let out oxygen, and that works well for plants in most environments. When these openings, these pores in the leaf open up, though, to allow for this exchange of gases, water can also evaporate out of those openings. And so in really hot and dry environments, when these pores open up to let in carbon dioxide and let out oxygen, the plants can dry out really quickly. And so in really hot and dry environments, plants have adapted a couple different ways of doing photosynthesis so that their stomata either don't need to be open so long or don't need to be open during the daytime when most plants would open up their stomata to do photosynthesis. So the 2 different types of photosynthesis that we'll talk about are the C4 pathway and the CAM pathway. So first here, we'll talk about the C4 pathway, and this is just a different type of photosynthesis, so it goes through photosynthesis a little bit differently. Still the same input items, the carbon dioxide and water, and still the same things coming out, oxygen and sugar. We just go through a little bit of a different cycle. And so in the C4 pathway, this includes things such as corn and sugarcane, which is this picture on this slide. And corn and sugarcane use this type of C4 photosynthesis, and this just uses an additional enzyme to help carbon dioxide stay in the plant. So when those pores on the leaf open up, normally carbon dioxide will kind of flow in and out. So when they open up, some carbon dioxide will be lost. And what this extra enzyme does is it helps the carbon dioxide stay in the plant and not get lost out those pores. So it minimizes the amount of time the stomata, those openings in the leaf, will need to stay open. And this reduces photorespiration, which is where the plants give off some carbon dioxide when the stomata open, which is not what we want because the plants need carbon dioxide. And because of this enzyme, the carbon, instead of getting broken down into a 3 carbon molecule to go through the Calvin cycle, it uses a 4 carbon molecule, and that's why it's called the C4 pathway. But essentially, it's just a different enzyme is utilized to make it so that those stomata or those pores in the leaves don't need to be open as long, so that the plant doesn't dry out in a really hot environment and give off a lot of carbon dioxide. Next type of photosynthesis is called CAM photosynthesis, and in CAM photosynthesis, the plant stomata, or openings in the leaf, those pores, open only at night. In our regular C3 photosynthesis, the stomata open during the day, and there's that whole process of light reactions that occur right at that point. Well, these plants do it a little bit backwards, so they open up their stomata at night, and they fix the carbon dioxide at night, they rearrange it, and then they sort of store that carbon dioxide until sunrise, and then the sun rays will supply the energy needed to power the Calvin cycle during the day. So essentially they just open their pores at night in the CAM photosynthesis. And the reason is that in these really hot, dry environments, it tends to be not as hot at night. And so when the stomata open at night, there's not as much water loss from those plants at night as there would be if these plants tried to open their stomata like this cactus in the daytime. It would lose a huge amount of water from opening up those pores in the daytime and dry out really quickly. So instead they open up their pores at night and minimizing water loss. Let's just go over a summary. Again, most plants will go through C3 photosynthesis, and the benefits of this is it's a very efficient use of ATP, that energy. The problem is that photorespiration does occur, and that's where you have, when those pores in the leaf open up, that some carbon dioxide is lost. And but most plants in most environments that aren't too dry, they can deal with that loss of carbon dioxide, they can deal with the loss of water during the daytime, and so they make that process work because it is the most efficient use of energy. Now, C4 photosynthesis happens in corn and sugarcane, things that live in really warm environments. The benefit is that there's less photorespiration or less loss of carbon dioxide and water when those pores open. The problem is that it uses more ATP, but it is needed to minimize water loss in those really warm environments. And finally, CAM photosynthesis here happens in things like a cactus, pineapple, orchid, things that live in dry environments. An advantage is that there's a lot less water loss since the stomata open at night. But again, it does use up more ATP, and that's a problem. And it's also hard for them to get enough CO2 in. That's another problem. But again, water loss is really minimized in these very hot, dry climates. So this is the best option for these type of plants to minimize water loss in the C4 and the CAM photosynthesis. Even though this one is the most energy efficient, sometimes other things become more important, like minimizing water loss, even if it takes more energy. That is the end of chapter 8, and congratulations, you made it through the last lecture of Bio 101. And next week we will be you'll just be reviewing for the final for the course. Keep in mind that the final is due on Thursday, not Sunday of finals week by 11:59 p.m. This sometimes confuses people because usually everything for the class has been due on Sunday. But since finals week ends on Friday, and that's the last day you can turn in work for, that's the last day I'll be grading work for the course. I need everything done by Thursday night because I will be grading and submitting everything for your grade on Friday. So also make sure you have all your late work due, all your late work turned in by Thursday of finals week by 11:59 p.m. If you have any questions about your grade as you are finishing up the course, please don't hesitate to ask me. If anything doesn't look right, let me know. And otherwise, it's been great working with you. I wish you the best as you go on from here and finish up all your finals and whatever you have planned after this quarter. It's been great having you all in class, and congratulations on making it to the end of the course.